So today I'm going to be presenting for you on behalf of my PhD student, Laura Bousser, who's not here in Nepal at the moment. And she has done her PhD research on the impact of paternal labour migration on the left-behind child's growth, using evidence from a birth cohort that we set up in the district of Dhanusha. So, as we all know, stunting is a massive problem globally, and particularly here in South Asia. 2 out of 5 of the stunted children in the world live in Southern Asia. So we know it's a massive problem for our population. We also know that many Nepalese men, especially men, are leaving their homes to seek work overseas in hope of securing a better future for their families. But what remains unclear is to what extent the father's labour migration is actually affecting the growth of the child that he leaves behind. Nepal has the highest share of remittances as a proportion of GDP in the world. It's at 31% in 2015. So much of the country's poverty reduction has been attributed to this growth in remittances. So we might assume that this might be impacting the nutritional status of our children. So our main research question is, how does the father's labour migration affect the left-behind child's growth? And more specifically, first of all, how is any kind of labour migration affecting the growth? Then, does it vary by the amount of time that the father spends abroad? Does it vary by the amount of remittances that the father sends home? And are some age periods in the child's life more sensitive to paternal migration than others? So the setting of our study is a growth monitoring cohort that we set up in the district of Dhanusha, in the plains of Nepal, that's down bordering with Bihar state of India. It's a lowland Terai part of the country, has the highest rate of labour migration in the country, and has high levels of malnutrition as well. So, as I said, this is a prospective cohort study, and we originally set up this study to look at the timing of the onset of stunting and the trajectory of stunting in children from 0 to 2 years. So we enrolled 602 newborns in 2012. And we weighed them at birth within 72 hours. And then we measured those children every 28 days. We measured their height and their weight every 28 days from birth to 2 years. So then when Laura began her PhD, she came back last year in 2018, and she measured about, I think it's 536 of those children again. She got their weight and their height and their body composition, and also collected some detailed information on the migration history of the father and other family members. So we analysed the data by, first of all, calculating length and height for age Z scores at 5 different time points. So although we had them closer together, we needed to clump the data. So we had them at birth, 6, 12, 24, and 72 months of age. And then at each of those time points, we determined whether the child had been exposed to the father's labour migration or not, and if so, what was the duration of the exposure. And then we divided our sample into 2 age groups. We looked at the children who were between 0 and 6 months of age, who should be exclusive breastfeeding period, and then children during early childhood, between 7 and 72 months of age. And then we used regression models to look at the association between attained height for age Z score and both the exposure to the father's labour migration and the total amount of remittances. So moving on to the results, and I wanted to be able to point at these for you, but I don't seem to be able to do that. I can't get a pointer to work, so you'll just have to bear with me. So what we found was that the levels of paternal migration were very high, and they increased with the age of the child. So at birth, if you look at the left-hand graph here, it's a little bit small, but the green bars show the children whose fathers had been away for more than 1 year. The blue bars, the blue parts of the bars, are children whose fathers had been away for between 1 and 12 months. And the red bars are the children whose father had not migrated. So you can see at birth, about a third of the children their father had been abroad before they were born. But by the time the children were 72 months old, between the ages of 2 and 6, 65% of the children's fathers had been abroad for at least some time. And the children's cumulative exposure to migration was a median of 25 months. So that's two years out of a 6-year-old's life. It's quite a long time. So that's the left-hand graph. Then if you look at the right, we found that the height for age Z score was dropping quite consistently over time between birth and 2 years. So by the time the children were 2, the mean height for age Z score was -2 Z scores. So that means 50% of the children were stunted by the time they were 2. They started off probably about, I think it was about 18% stunting at birth, and then it increased over the first 2 years of life. Then when we followed those children up when they were about 6, we saw that there had been some catch-up growth. Stunting had fallen back down to about 30%, and the mean height for age Z score had increased to -1.61. So the children did catch up a bit, but still, as you can see, there's a still very high prevalence of stunting in this part of the country. So we wanted to know, to look at this exposure of the father's labour migration and its effect upon growth. So we constructed some directed acyclic graphs to identify the confounders and the potential biasing paths and causal pathways. And then we used this DAG to decide what factors to adjust for in our regression analyses. And because we had lots of repeated measures on the same children with these 28-day frequency measurements, we used mixed effects regression models to account for clustering within child, as well as clustering within the data geographically as well. So the first thing we found is that actually, although we'd expected that the father going away might have brought prosperity upon the family and that the children might therefore have grown better and be taller, we actually found the converse. Children of labour migrants had lower height for age Z score, and that was after adjustment for the age of the child, the father's education, household food security, and maternal height. So if we took the whole sample between 0 and 72 months, we saw that the child was 0.8 Z scores lower if their father had been a migrant. So we disaggregated that again by the age groups of the child. And if you look at the graph here, the vertical line at 0 is the reference value for the children whose fathers were not migrants. And then if you look at the orange dots, those are the regression coefficients for the children who were in the 0 to 6 month age category. And the green dots are the children in the 7 to 72 month category. So you can see that, as I explained in the earlier slide, the average effect was 0.08 height for age Z scores, lower than non-migrant fathers' children. But it was a larger effect in the first 6 months of life. So those children were 0.15 Z scores shorter than the children of non-migrant fathers. But this effect basically disappeared in the later period between 7 and 72 months. Then if we look at the duration of the father's exposure, so the two lower clusters of dots, if you look at the one for less than 12 months, the middle cluster there, you can see that all of those, the children whose father had been away for less than 12 months, that those children were more stunted. They had lower height for age Z score than the children of non-migrants. But this effect disappeared after the father had been away for longer. So if we look at it another way, using this longitudinal trajectory of the height for age trajectory together, plotted against the duration of the father's exposure to the father's time abroad, you can see that the height for age Z score drops at the beginning, and then it kind of flattens out, and really there's no influence of the migration upon the height for age Z score. And if you look at the middle line in my table here, you can see that all the age groups, the 0 to 72 months, the 0 to 6 months, and when we keep the 7 to 72 months separate, they all have significantly lower height for age Z scores associated with the father being away for less than a year. But once the father's been away for more than a year, then the effect disappears. We also, again, looked at the effect of remittances and the quantity of remittances and whether this had an effect upon the growth of the child. And what we used the group which had either the father was a migrant, he either sent no remittances or less than 10,000 rupees over the period he was away. That was the reference group, and then the two comparison groups were the children whose fathers had sent more than 10,000 rupees and the children whose father was not a migrant. And as you can see in this table, the p-value, the coefficients are small and the p-values are not significant. So the amount of remittances that were sent by the father seemed to have really no effect upon the child's growth. And we also did a plot here with the net remittances along the bottom, and you can see that basically between 0 remittances and up to 4,000, the graph is more or less flat. There's really very little strong relationship between remittances and growth of the child. Why do children of newly migrated fathers do worse than non-migrant fathers' children? Well, it could be the disruptive effect of the father's absence. It could be that both there's a strain upon the mother and the child left behind, having to cope without him. It could be that the household is struggling with the debt of migration. And Laura's data showed very clearly that many of these migrants actually have very small net profit from the migration that they do, and that there's a very big debts incurred to get to these Middle Eastern countries in the first place. The other thing is, why do we think that children of long-term migrants don't do better? You think, well, maybe once they've paid back their loan, they'd start to benefit. Well, we observed that actually a lot of the spending was invested in infrastructure. So people would build a cement house with bricks and cement, but not necessarily be spending that on child nutrition. Or they might spend it on weddings or other kinds of daily expenditure or schooling of the child rather than on nutrition. And as I said before, the net benefit from the migration was really not that high. So in conclusion, we found no evidence of a benefit of father's migration on the left behind child. And in fact, migration was negatively impacting child growth, particularly among younger children. So I'd just like to end by thanking all the data collectors, enumerators, and staff from MIRA who made this study possible, and also all the women and children who took part in the study with us, and our donors, the Wellcome Trust, Martin Rushton, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.